I want to begin tonight. We're continuing the series on spirituality and the 12 steps. And I'm going to begin tonight by doing a reading I picked from the language of letting go. The reading is from July 6th. Step 7, humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. In the 6th and 7th steps of the program, we become willing to let go of our defects of characters, our issues, our behaviors. Isn't that simple? We don't have to comfort. We don't have to contort ourselves to make ourselves change. We don't have to force change. For once, we don't have to do it ourselves. All we have to do is strive for an attitude of willingness and humility. All we have to do is ask God for what we want and need, and then trust God to do for us, which we cannot and do not have to do for ourselves. You don't have to watch with bated breath for how and when this will change. This is not a self-help program. In this miraculous and effective program that has brought about recovery and change for millions, we become changed by working the steps. Today, God, help me surrender to recovery and to the process by which I believe changed, by which I become changed. Help me focus on the step I need. Help me do my part, relax, and allow the rest to happen. I wanted to read that because one of the things I want to work on tonight is the second set of steps. And I want to talk about steps 4 through 9. We began last week by talking about the first 3 steps, which I refer to as the foundation steps. And I love the way the program was put together. We're given the foundation in steps 1 through 3. Steps 4 through 9 are called the working steps, and steps 10 through 12 are the daily, everyday living steps. But it's interesting how the middle part of the steps, 4 through 9, give us a beautiful, beautiful formula for being able to go on a journey of self-discovery and self-love. We begin that journey with the 4th step, which is to do a fearless moral inventory of our life. And I want to emphasize something about that step because sometimes people get a little overboard in doing it. You got to take your time. I mentioned last week, the slower the better. Get help, get direction, help you with it. And one of the things we have to be able to do is be able to do part of our 4th step might be dealing with resentments, guilt, fear, control. All different types of things are connected to that. But the real reality of it is we have to be able to identify what we want to work on and then basically take a look at where it came from. And then the most important part of the 4th step is to own our part and to come up with a resolution. See, I believe very deep. I'm going to share this with you because I know when I was a priest, I did a lot of 5th steps with people in the AA program. And a lot of the 5th steps to me kind of resembled a little bit of people going to confession. Literally. I know what one 5th step I did with someone lasted 3 hours. But the bottom line is, this is not about just beating yourself up, finding out what's wrong with you, and being able to get all that out. That's part of it. But the other part basically is, how can I find resolution? Which means, how can I find a way in which I can learn and grow from what I went through in the course of my journey in life? See, the purpose of the steps is for us to grow, for us to begin to learn about ourselves, to begin to build an experience. And what's so beautiful about the step, we have to try to keep it on a positive vein, because it's not about looking at what's wrong with me. It's being able to identify my experiences and be able to learn from them and grow from them. Because I truly believe for everything that happened to us in life, we can come to a resolution. We can come to an understanding, a concept of the steps. You know, I find it interesting because I also find that when you do the steps, you work them differently. I remember doing my first 4th step back in the late 70s. And I really thought I had done a really thorough job. I came to find out later on in the 80s when I did it again, I had some other stuff I had to deal with. And then when I did it in the program I'm in now, I had more stuff to deal with. We're always working and growing and finding out things about ourselves. But I've learned everything's about layers. It's about learning to forgive, to heal. And that's why the fourth step is so important, because it gives me a chance, an opportunity to look at my life and be able to go through a healing process with things that happened from the past. See, I can't bring back the past, but I can learn from it. And I can learn not only to forgive myself, but to forgive others and learn the gift of forgiveness. In the fifth step, they tell us to share our inventory with God, with ourselves, and with another human being. One of the things I learned, I want to share this with you because I take this from the Karate Kid. Remember in the Karate Kid where you had wax on, wax off? Well, change that mantra to the fifth step of the program. It's called negative out, positive in. Negative out, positive in. And what I learned in the fifth step is that step of forgiveness. It's a step of growth. The fifth step connects us way back to the principles of recovery, because what I'm learning in the fourth step was the courage to be able to look within, the courage to look at my life, the courage to embrace it. In the fifth step, I learned the gift of integrity. In doing so, I now have to be honest. And one of the things I've learned is to take my life, to give it to God, and to realize the fact that each of our lives are a walking prayer. To be honest, to be open, is one of the highest forms of prayer. And to be able to share it with ourselves, to acknowledge and be able to heal, and then to share it with someone else. And we tell people, when you share your fifth step, share it with somebody who's going to listen, somebody you can trust, somebody who basically will just listen and not judge and not give you advice. Because what I'm doing is I'm actually taking stuff that's been buried in me for a long period of time, and I'm sharing it. I'm connecting it out. And sometimes that means doing it with a therapist or somebody you're connected to. Because we all have our secrets, we all have our stuff, we all have our history. It's all part of growing, it's all part of learning. And I really like to look at the steps in doing my work, to look at them in a positive way, and to realize they're all about healing, they're all about growth. Step 6 and step 7, I have a nickname for these steps. I notice what happens to a lot of us in recovery. We have a tendency to do the fourth step and the fifth step, and then take a break. But I really believe deeply the next two steps are two of the most important steps in recovery. Step 6 and step 7. To be able to get in touch with our defects of character, and then to humbly ask God to remove them. These two steps really are about willingness. They're about humility. It's being able to acknowledge the defects that we have. And by the way, we're all defective in one way or another. But remember something which is really important. For every defect, there's an asset. That's why I love these steps. Because I learn, if I have the courage and the willingness to be open, the willingness to grow, the willingness to experience new things, the willingness to learn and grow from my experiences. And sometimes that's not easy. And sometimes I'm learning more and more that to get in touch with your defects means to get more honest with yourself, to learn more things about yourself. It's interesting in my life. I share this with you because I've had the privilege of writing 3 books, but I'm going to be very honest with you. I probably could not read any of those books. I'd probably fall asleep in the first chapter. Not because I'd be bored, because I just can't do it that way. I can write, but to be able to process by reading is not one of my assets. Is not one of my defects. The asset is that I've learned something. I've learned I have a different way of learning. I went through college, 2 graduate programs without reading the textbooks. I learned by osmosis. I learned by sharing. I learned by getting into study groups and listening to people share about stuff. I have this capacity. It was only until I worked these steps and got in touch with and stopped looking at things negatively and realized I have talents and gifts I didn't even know I had. For example, my wife is an avid reader. My wife could read a book and discuss it with me, and I'll give a lecture on it the next day. I can absorb. People don't believe this, but I took the test to become a registered basketball official and never read the rule book. The reason why I picked everything up from refereeing 100 CYO games, being around other officials. I learned through connection. Somebody told me that through osmosis, I pick stuff up. And what I'm learning about these steps, which are so important, if we have the willingness to be open to new things in life, the willingness to grow, the willingness to experience different things, then all of a sudden, doors will open up. It's interesting. At the board meeting, they were talking a lot about this thing called AI, and of course, I didn't really understand a lot they were talking about. So on Easter Sunday, we had dinner at my wife's sister's house. And my nephew was there, and he's really into all this stuff. That's what he does for a living. So I got him in a corner and I said, "Do me a favor. Give me a little bit of a dummy course on AI. Give me an idea." And I told him what the board had talked about. They had talked about taking all my recordings, my lectures, all my writings, putting everything together into whatever this is. And apparently AI was going to be able to sort it out, and they'd be able to see how I think and what's going on inside of me. I said, "Wow, really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Because all your stuff that's written, you put down, and it's all connected, and they can actually sort it out. It's a good way to be able to take a look at the sense of your legacy." And I said, "Okay, I believe it, but still don't understand it, how they do it. But it's like they can do all types of things." The same thing happened. A friend of mine who's connected with recovery, he's in the roofing business, and I called him to come and look at our house because we had some storm damage from the winds and stuff to that effect because we have an older roof. And he came in to take a look at us and handed us a packet. I said, "You're going to go look at the roof?" He said, "I did already." I said, "What do you mean you did?" He said, "I used a drone to look at your roof." He actually showed us diagrams of the top of our roof, diagrams of where the tiles are lifted up. He showed me exactly the exact dimensions and diagrams and everything else, all the stuff to present to the insurance company. And he did it without going on the roof. And I said, "What happened to the old day we put a ladder up, we went up and looked at the roof?" No, now. Because the little machine goes over the top and finds everything out. And I was just amazed to see all the material he had ready for us to present to the insurance adjuster. It blew me away. But I think what I'm learning to try to have an open mind, that's what humility is really all about. That's what these 2 steps are trying to tell us. There is so much to learn, so many things to experience, doors that can open. We have to have the willingness to change, the willingness to grow. And these two steps are exactly about that, to humbly ask God to remove the barriers to our growth and our learning. I know it's easy. It's easy for me and many of us to kind of get lazy and just stay back in the old ways. But it's kind of an adventure to begin to look at new things in new directions. Do I understand them? Not completely. But at least I do have the willingness to listen, the willingness to learn, the willingness to be open, and to be able to realize that people I connect with are great teachers. I love being around young people, their energy, the way they look at life. And again, they teach me so many things. And I hope I can teach them many things too. You know, being the patriarch, it's a lot easier to teach them. But the bottom line is, as you get older, you want to give back, but you want to learn. And I hope and I pray that we never get tired, that we have that tendency just to stay connected. And that's why when I look at the 6th and 7th step, I have another nickname. I call them the itsy bitsy steps, the connecting steps, because I really see them as the center of our growth process. Because one of the most powerful parts about doing inventory, most powerful parts about sharing and trusting, it's not easy. Many of us have gotten hurt over the years. Many of us have, done things that maybe we're not too proud of. I know I've got my stuff, but I'm able now to share that and connect that with people I feel comfortable with. But I'm also have the willingness, and I have to pray for that every day and ask God every day to give me the willingness to be open to change, to have the willingness to be able to grow, the willingness to be able to learn, to be open to new things and new directions. That's why these two steps are so important. Sometimes we look at these things negatively. You want me to get in touch with my defects, but your defects are really a gift. They're another way of learning, of discovering things, because I really believe deep down inside, every one of us is gifted, talented, and every one of us has the potential of doing so many beautiful things. I love that quotation from Albert Einstein where he said, as human beings, we only use about 15% of our mental capacity. Of course, at the end of it, he said, thank God. Yeah. So basically, he warned us and he said, maybe it's good that we don't use the rest of it because there's no telling what we can do. And yet I'm learning over and over again that I have the willingness to grow. And that, to me, that's how simple these steps are. To have the willingness to learn, the willingness to grow, the willingness to realize the fact that there's things I can do and there's things I can't do, to be able to admit to that. A lot of times when I work with my receptionist or young people in the program, and they'll say to me, this person called me, I didn't know what to tell them. I said, tell them you don't know what to tell them. Get their phone number, go talk to somebody who can tell you what to give them, then call them back and tell them. You don't have to have the answers to everything. Nobody has the answers to everything. Every day, I hope and pray that we learn one more thing. We discover something else. It was almost like it filled me up deeply. What we experienced, what the Pope did before he died, to be able to say Mass on Easter, and then to be able to get into that Pope mobile, whatever it is, and go around and visit people. That took a tremendous amount of courage. And then to go back into his house and release his spirit. What a beautiful, beautiful tribute, for compassion and love, and to be able to give the gift of yourself to others. It's just amazing. You never know when you're going to experience something new and things will happen. God takes us in the strangest directions sometimes. And so remember, Don't put yourself down. Look at yourself positively and realize as long as we're breathing, as long as we're on this earth, we have to have the willingness to change, to grow, because we don't know, and to stay in the moment, to celebrate the moment. That leads us to the 8th and 9th steps, to make a list of all the people we've injured and we've harmed, to make direct amends whenever humanly possible, making sure we don't injure or harm anybody else, and ourselves, of course. What's so beautiful about these steps is they're telling us to close the doors, to make settlement, to make peace. You know, to make a list of people we injured and we harmed. If you're a human being and you walked on this earth, there are times when we do injure somebody else. There's times when there's harm. And sometimes you don't even know it. It's totally amazing. You may have said something somewhere, someplace. You never know how it touched another person in another place. And that's why we have to be able to acknowledge what we do know and be able to make peace, be able to make amends. I know on my journey, I spent a lot of time blaming and being angry and going through all kinds of changes, basically because I was struggling within my own self. And I realized I had to go back and say, I'm sorry. It's okay to say those magical words. But there's some people you can make direct amends to. But remember, I learned this from my sponsor. My sponsor used to say to me, you only make direct amends if the person you're making direct amends to is open and willing to participate in the process with you, and it will be a good situation for you as well as for them. I never totally understood that till he told me that, because I had this vision. I had to go run around and no, stop. There's different ways, because what we call direct amends and what we call indirect amends. And that's why I tell people this, and I'll say it as strongly as I can. I don't recommend anybody doing the 8th and 9th step unless they do it with guidance and with direction. Because all of us, we are a little compulsive. And when we decide we're going to straighten something out, and we then decide the other person's going to get straightened out, it doesn't work that way. We have to realize the fact we have to teach things with kid gloves. Don't put yourself in jeopardy, put others in jeopardy. So we have to learn a technique called indirect amends. I'll give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about. I had a gentleman who, in his active addiction, he's one of my South Philly guys. In his active addiction, he decided to make his drug money. It was very ingenious. He got dressed up as a Catholic priest and went door to door doing the block collection. And he made out pretty well, Because the little Italian ladies had their envelope waiting for him when he arrived. So basically, he manipulated like crazy. And so I sat with him when he was doing his step work, and he said to me, Vince, how do I make amends to all the people I've hoodwinked? I said, well, let's sit down. How much do you think you actually took from them over the years? Give me a ballpark figure. He said, probably $5,000 or $6,000. I said, okay, well, then we settled on 6. And I said, here's what you do. You have a job today, you're working. So we settled on a sum of money. Once a month, he mails a cashier's check to one of the parishes in Philadelphia. And each month he sends to a different parish. He takes care of it. He's making amends. It's a way for him to give back for what he took and to make amends. There's always a solution to everything. There's a way in which we deal with it. See, again, I know in my own life I had to make amends to my father and to my mother after their death. I never truly understood some of the frustration, the anger, and the stuff I had towards them. And there are different ways of doing it. One of the things I learned, to be able to make peace, make settlement. And I'll tell you another story to bring this out. A gentleman who was an active drug addict, he was active into all kinds of addictions. And his mother babbled him and enabled him like crazy. She would pay his rent. He would curse at her and yell at her and demand stuff from her. And he was always high and messed up. Somehow he joined the army and ended up in Vietnam. While I was in Vietnam, his drug addiction got worse. His mother died while he was overseas. And when they gave him the news, his response was, good riddance to the old bitch. Because basically, that's where he was at that time. When he finally came back, he survived and came back. He went through the VA and got sober. I met him down at the South Philly clubhouse. We talked for a while. And he said, can I ask you something? He said, I was a priest at the time. He said, Father, how do I make amends to my mother? She was so good to me, and I was so nasty to her. But she's deceased. So I asked him to write a letter to his mother to get rid of all the feelings, the anger, the frustration, everything, to release it, to get it out, to let her know how much he loved her and cared about her. Then we took the letter, and a couple other people from the program were with me. We went to the cemetery. We knelt at the gravesite. He read the letter, cried, and then he took the letter and dug a little hole and stuck the letter into the groundwork as part of the burial. And we prayed together and we celebrated together. And I did a little funeral service just to do a closure on it. There's so many different ways to be able to make peace, especially if there's a situation where you just can't go in there like a bulldozer. You always remember that. Be gentle to yourself. And above all, don't be afraid to make amends to yourself. Because the one person we harm the most, and many of us forget that, is ourselves. The situations we put ourselves in, some of the stuff we carried inside of us for a long period of time. And it's really important to be able to settle things. It's really important to be able to have a sense of peace inside of yourself. It's a big piece of it when you come right down to it. And that's why it's so important to use these steps as ways to really go on this beautiful journey of self-discovery and self-love. I get excited around the steps because I really believe the steps are a tool for this self-discovery, a tool for learning. It doesn't make any difference what age you are. It doesn't make any difference what program you're in. It doesn't make any difference if you're just a simple human being living in the world. The steps work. Even to the point Hazelton put out a beautiful little book. I get a kick out of it. It's called The 12 Steps for Everybody, for anyone who really wants to use them. Okay, it's a step book for the general public. I'm glad of that. It's nice because I really believe very deeply, that these steps are really a spiritual way of life. And steps 4 through 9 are just a formula for us to go inside, to do a healing with ourselves, to do a healing with situations around us. And what's so beautiful about these steps, they teach us the love. They teach us that these steps are done out of love for ourselves and love for others. It's about settlement. It's about making peace. It's about taking responsibility for things we did and being able to finally make peace with it. It's just amazing sometimes things that we do. but eventually the doors open up and we go into different directions with things. And so face the steps, especially 4 through 9, with an attitude of gratitude, an attitude of humility, an attitude of love. And it's a journey. And I hope and pray that the journey will continue even to a couple of days after you're gone. Who knows? I don't know. All you can do is what you can do. Look at the example of what we just experienced, with the Pope, and examples of people I've met who really have given their all. It's a beautiful part about the journey and about life. And so take steps 4 through 9 as a way in which we can go within and go through a healing, both of ourselves and with others. And those steps will help us in the healing process, which is so important. We'll continue again next week, and we're going to do steps 10, 11, and 12. I call them the gratitude steps, the daily, everyday living steps. So let us pray and ask God to bless us and guide us as we work on ourselves and work on our journey. Let us pray. God, we come before you in prayer. We ask the God of our understanding, our divine presence, to be our guide and be our strength. We look back and we're grateful for all the experiences of life. Teach us to heal, to forgive. Teach us to make peace. Teach us to acknowledge our humanness, to acknowledge our mistakes, to be open to learn and grow from them. Teach us to begin to experience the gifts, the talents, the many things that we have deep within. Being able to overcome so many things in life, we can begin to discover a beautiful part of each and every one of us. Together with our journey and those that love us and care for us, we live the principles of this program. We're open to grow. We're open to love. God, you are so special. And you have sent us on this journey, the journey of life. Please help us to face it with gratitude, with willingness, with humility. Help us to keep growing and learning and to be open to where the journey takes us. We thank you. We come together in gratitude, and we ask for your blessing as we walk our journey. We ask this in your name. Amen.